people in this country and across the world are bewildered that the UK government doesn't come to the same conclusion. What else has to happen before you would deem Israel to be in breach of international humanitarian law?
Why, in your opinion, are children dying of hunger and malnutrition in an area of the world in which food is plentiful, just 44 miles from Tel Aviv?
The extraordinary
terrorist
attack by Hamas on that day.
So the appalling atrocity of October the 7th led to crop failures, led to what? I mean, what's the direct link between that appalling atrocity and the death of innocent children from hunger?
Without a credible plan in place, how can Israel demonstrate intent and capability to comply with international humanitarian law?
Well, that's, with respect, that's not quite what we said. What we said is that we do not think an operation in Rafah should go ahead without there being a proper plan, and that we have seen no such plan, and therefore our position remains that without seeing that plan should not go ahead.
Well, if you haven't seen the plan, how can you declare yourself content around Israel's intent and capability? You have no evidence. We have a chart in front of us where you take things through certain steps. If that doesn't exist, how can it possibly be that you declare yourselves satisfied if you have not seen a plan?
Well, the significant operation in Rafah has, it appears, has not yet started, and therefore we would not be...
100,000 people had to move, if that's not significant. 600,000. If that's not significant, then what is?
Well, it's true, and the Israeli Defence Force warned 400,000 to move, and 800,000 have moved, and we are seeking, along with our allies, to take care of them in the best way we can. The committee will know that British aid has been delivered both by maritime means and the pier, which pierced the beach now.
The displacement of 800,000 people would imply quite a significant operation, no?
Well, they've given a warning that 400,000 should go. 800,000 have chosen to go. But that of itself would not lead us to make a change in its assessment.
The scale of this is enormous. And you talk about 600,000 people moving. By 800,000. And some have chosen to go. What choice did they have to move? Was this just, I think I want to go and live somewhere else? I mean, isn't that a preposterous suggestion to think that this is a matter of free will to say I'm going to move somewhere else?
No, the issue so what you're saying to me is I've set out the government's structure, the strategy that governments follow, never really revealing the legal advice, but acting always in accordance with it. I said it, and you're saying to me that this situation is so awful, should we not depart from that precedent? And my answer to you is no, we should not depart from it.
I'm saying that on the basis of credible NGOs, international bodies and partner countries, that the threshold's long since been reached, and people in this country and across the world are bewildered that the UK government doesn't come to the same conclusion. What else has to happen before you would deem Israel to be in breach of international humanitarian law?
Well, I think it's incredibly important that these decisions are not reached at the whim of a minister at the dispatch box responding to the mood in Parliament.
Does the UK government regard international humanitarian law as an absolute, or is it a spectrum?
Well, international humanitarian law and the criteria under which we assess whether a country is abiding by international humanitarian law are precisely what I have set out. You know, we have profound concerns about the humanitarian position inside Rafah, but that is separate from the issue of whether or not the criteria have been reached, which mean that we would determine there have been a breach.
What I want to do is I want to go back to the rule of law which you brought up. And I'll ask again, does the UK government regard international humanitarian law as an absolute, or is it a spectrum?
Well, it has to be interpreted, and that is why we have the advantage of legal advice in making that interpretation. It goes back to the point I was making before, that this is not for the whim of a minister. This is for a proper process with the different stages which I have set out, properly conducted.
Let me go back then to 2019. And in the evidence to the Court of Appeal regarding weapons sales to Saudi Arabia, the UK government said in terms of the use of those weapons in Yemen that Saudi breaches of international humanitarian law fell, and I quote, well within the margin of error that would be expected of a conflict of this nature. Now, where in the Geneva Convention it says, that it's acceptable to have a margin of error in international humanitarian law, I don't know. But is the government then using that principle it used for Saudi in 2019, that there is an acceptable margin of error within international humanitarian law in assessing its decisions on Israel?
Well, I wasn't privy to those discussions.
Yes, but you are here on behalf of the UK government.
Do you accept that starvation is being used as a weapon of war, given the fact the UN figures, particularly in northern Gaza, but also across Gaza just now, the numbers of children that are dying from starvation and malnutrition? And you're talking about how much effort you're making to try and get aid in, which I fully accept, but that aid's not been getting in since the war began. I was out in Egypt in February hearing exactly that. In fact, the aid that's getting in now is a lot less than what there was even before the war began. And even then, at that point, at least Gazans, people in Gaza themselves, could supplement their food from what they could grow. That's no longer sustainable. So do you accept then that under the current circumstances, as you said yourself, there are profound concerns of what's going on, and I know I'm asking you to put your minister's hat on here, that starvation could be used as a weapon of war, and that would breach international humanitarian law and would certainly ask us to reconsider our arms export licences?
So you cannot use starvation as a weapon of war and remain within international humanitarian law. So that is clear. But the judgment that is made, and we exercise that judgment on the basis of specific legal advice on these matters, and on the basis of that legal advice we reach our conclusion. And as I have set out, as of today, this is a rolling process, but as of today, the judgment that has been made by the Foreign Secretary is the one that was announced in Washington.
Can I just check, is it your assessment that people are dying because of lack of access to aid?
Whether or not that was my assessment would not directly affect judgments on international humanitarian law.
What I'm zeroing in on here is D. We've got it listed on the diagram in front of you there. The country's record of compliance, including analysis of specific alleged IHL violations. It would appear in the court documents that His Majesty's government has provided that the government does accept that there was an IHL violation in the linking of the issue around unacceptable retention of hostages and the provision or facilitation of aid. And I'm asking you, do you accept that there was a violation of international humanitarian law in that instance?
Well, there may or may not have been, but in terms of the inquiry that the committee is conducting, that is an issue upon which legal advice would be given and received by the Foreign Secretary, and on the basis of that legal advice, he would then reach his conclusions on whether or not international humanitarian law had been breached, whether, as I keep repeatedly say, the three key criteria under 2C were breached, and then he would reach his conclusions. But the assessment of that would be on the basis, would come to him through legal advice, which he would then consider before reaching his judgment.
Okay. Well, you will have no doubt seen the US State Department report to Congress under Section 2 of the National Security Memorandum, and you'll no doubt know that it concluded, and I'm quoting here, it's reasonable to assess that defence articles covered under NSM 20, which is the act in question, have been used by Israeli security forces since October 7th in instances inconsistent with its IHL obligations or with established best practices for mitigating civilian harm. Are you aware of that conclusion from the United States?
The answer to your question, Mr. Byrne, is that we note what our allies and partners conclude and do on all these matters, but we have our own processes and we stick religiously to those.
The UK government is content that there is no clear risk or no risk of Israel being in breach of IHL?
Well, the British government is appalled at what is happening. It's doing everything it can to alleviate suffering, spending an inordinate amount of time with our very strong foreign service trying to look at the day after. But if you're
I'm talking about today. So if the British government is appalled, what is it appalled about?
Well, we're appalled at the appalling attack that took place on October the 7th. We're appalled at the situation in Gaza. British ministers have set that out very clearly. But effectively, you're asking me the same question the Chair asked, and my answer to you is precisely the same as my answer to him.
Why, in your opinion, are children dying of hunger and malnutrition in an area of the world in which food is plentiful, just 44 miles from Tel Aviv? Why are they dying?
Because of the results of the appalling attack on October the 7th.
That's not the reason.
The extraordinary terrorist attack by Hamas on that day.
So the appalling atrocity of October the 7th led to crop failures? Led to what? I mean, what's the direct link between that appalling atrocity and the death of innocent children from hunger 44 miles from Tel Aviv in an area of the world where food is plentiful? Draw that line for me, please.
So, on the issue of crop failure, that is a longer-term issue for the region. But it is the direct impact of the attack on October the 7th, to which Israel has an absolute right of self-defence, but they must act within humanitarian law. So that is the answer to Mr. O'Hara's question.